Thank you, Evan, for all of the notes, templating, and capturing and everything else.
It needs to get done, so chugga.
Justin, do you I assume William is coming, but
He seemed he prodded and asked, and yes. So unless he's had something come up, or um,
well, we can give folks another minute or so to join and go through the other normal business.
Will has
Hello.
arrived. All right,
Hey, how's it going?
good, good.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and go through the intro for the agenda. And to kick things off, we have our wonderful facilitator script. Just to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to LFX and YouTube shortly after. Your participation in these meetings is in an agreement to abide by the Cloud Native Code of Conduct, which can be found in the TOC repo and the tag security repo. Evan has already volunteered to scribe, but I believe he is also going to be moderating the debate. So if anybody else wants to scribe as well, although we probably don't need notes for the debate itself. Um, and yeah. So with all of that said, one of the first things is new member introductions. If anybody here hasn't been here before and would like to introduce themselves, now would be a great time. All right. Good to see lots of familiar faces. And community demo. I don't believe we have a community demo for today, but we have a debate, which is going to be awesome. Um, do we have any other time zone meetings? I'm trying to remember when the last APAC meeting was.
The
Don't
last
see.
APAC meeting was on the 3rd, 4th.
Okay. So nothing for this week. TOC meeting update. I missed the one this
They
past
processed a
week.
bunch of sandbox stuff was all. So
Okay. Did they make it to Sandbox Zero?
roughly, yeah.
All right, cool.
Actually, in less than
So
an hour.
the theoretical new tag structure is working. Huh?
Mm,
That's
I don't know whether that was due to the tag structure or not, but something was working.
all right. So rather than diving into the project updates now, I think we can kick over to um, the debates.
Okay. Um, so Justin raised before this a good point that um, we're aiming to highlight two sides of an issue. And we have two speakers who are going to speak to that side of the issue. They're going to take a relatively extreme position for the purpose of advocating for for that point of view, and it may or may not represent their own opinions. Um, if you have questions or things that you would like them to provide more information or detail about, please comment in the chat. I will be watching that, and I will bring those up for additional, enlightenment. The goal is, at the end of this, we should all be better informed and more enlightened about the particular topic. And so with that, William, do you want to start off just introducing yourself and maybe explaining real quick the proposition that you're going to be arguing for today?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for the introduction. So my name is William. I'm currently a software engineer at Astral. People mostly know us for UV, Rough, and other Python ecosystem tooling. Before that, though, I worked at TrailBits, where I ran the open source security group, and so I have about a decade of experience working on open source projects in sort of a large domain of ecosystems. And so the position I'll be arguing for, I wrote a blog post last month, which I think the title of was "We Should All Be Using Dependency Cooldowns," I think is what I titled it. And the basic argument laid out in that post is that if you observe the last 18 months of compromised packages, that is not packages that have vulnerabilities discovered in them, but that are actually compromised by an attacker, the large majority of these compromised packages are removed by the index within, I think, over 50% are removed within 72 hours, and over 90% are removed within 7 days of initial upload.
Let's just explain what the dependency cooldowns are, and then we can get to the details as we get further into the debate.
Sure. Yeah. So at the simplest level, a cooldown is simply a hold-off period. It says, do not perform an upgrade of this dependency until a certain period, which is defined by policy, has passed. And so I argue in the post for a cooldown of somewhere between 3 and 7 days for most dependencies.
And Justin, do you want to introduce yourself and explain, a little bit of the composition before we get into more details?
Sure. I'm a professor at NYU, Justin Kapos. Been working in software supply chain security for more than 20 years. I built a lot of stuff that's widely used in this space, including the security architecture used by most Linux package managers and Tough and Intoto and GitTough and other stuff like that. I am going to be arguing the position that we should be doing updates effectively immediately.
Okay. So, William, you started to get into this, but can you explain a little bit more about the problem that you're attempting to solve with this cooldown process?
Yeah. So the underlying observed problem is that, at least again, over the last 18 months, we've seen a series of attacks that have either increased in volume or they've increased in sort of like breadth of scales. Like the most recent one, I think that's been on everybody's mind, has been Shai-Hulud, where you've seen like a worm style attack where a single npm credential or PyPI credential or whatever is leaked, and then that worms out to a set of other packages who have their CI or publishing credentials leaked, and it sort of fans out from there. And so by the time you've patched one, there's already 5 or 6 others that have been had their credentials stolen to be compromised later. That's the basic thing that's being observed. Yeah.
And so you're proposing a cooldown. How does that actually help solve the problem?
Yeah. So the observation is that what happens with ecosystems like NPM in particular, and I think PyPI and others to a lesser extent, is that people tend to either manually, automatically upgrade their dependencies. So they'll just run cargo update, or they'll run npm install, which I believe, and they may have changed this default, but I believe would update the log file by default. Or potentially more troubling, they would have dependabot run on a pretty tight schedule. And so every 4, 6, 12, 24 hours, dependabot will run, and it'll run NCI, update your dependencies, and then you'll either auto merge it because dependabot is trusted, essentially, it's within the trust domain, or dependabot is given secret access because it's a trusted component, and then dependabot itself becomes a pivot source for dependency compromise. And so the idea behind a cooldown would be simply wait instead of giving the attacker the jump. Is the idea.
Um, so, Justin, do you want to explain some of the problems that this introduces or other solutions that would be?
Yeah. So for those of you who are anywhere near as old as I am, you remember the bad old days of Windows, the bad old days of web browsers, the bad old days of everything, where we did not have automatic updates. And those days were horrible from a security standpoint, which is one of the reasons why we're left with a lot of like legacy vendors selling crapware and everything else. And so this is, I think, taking us back to a time where we are, where the attackers, of course, are going to be able to see things like, for instance, here is a new release of this thing that fixes some problem. And the attackers are going to then very easily, very quickly going to be able to reverse engineer this and turn this into attacks. This is like a fundamental known problem. And it's one of the reasons why the actual number one piece of advice for security experts to keep things secure is update, 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 right? And so from that perspective, I think that any delay here, since the attackers are going to know this, they're going to see this, and since we cannot tell the difference between a security impactful patch and a security non-impactful patch, that's like not a easy problem to decide. I think that this entire direction is fraught with huge problems, especially given the comparative frequency of updates that happen extremely often, that have security implications, versus the rarity of the thing that we're trying to protect against, which is at least a factor of 10,000, if not a million, less frequent than things. So I think this is like a niche solution to a very niche problem that makes the common case that everyone needs to worry about today way worse.
Speaking of the NPM ecosystem, there was a recent React vulnerability that was pretty bad. Do you have suggestions, William, on how how dependency cooldowns would interact with things like that React vulnerability?
Yeah, I think the Rust or rather React vulnerability is a great example of why you cannot employ cooldowns in a blanket matter. I think if you were to employ them without, for example, considering CVEs or other published vulnerability markers, you would end up in a position like Justin is warning against, which is that you would end up with well-known vulnerabilities in well-known unpatched vulnerabilities in your employed products. I wanted to point out one other thing though, which is that Justin, I think, correctly calls out that this is a niche scenario. I mean, we're talking about, in terms of volume, a relatively small number of compromises over time. However, I think the thing that mediates that, or at least in my opinion, overrides that observation, is that the impact of that we've seen so far with these compromises, even though there's only, I think there's been two sort of like rounds of Shai-Hulud so far this year, which is tiny in the global scheme of things in terms of vulnerabilities. The impact of those has been significant. I mean, if I remember correctly, one of the keystone packages they compromised with the first, or maybe it was the second round, was the NX package, which the last time I checked, NX is like one of the top 10 packages on NPM in terms of installs.
That was the first round.
Yeah. And so I think it is true that, like, if you look at like the pyramid of distribution, these are at the very top of like one or two instances a year, but in terms of broad impact, it sort of tilts the other way, where you see a lot of compromise activity or like compromise potential with these critical packages.
May I? Sorry, am I able to respond to that? I think that what you're saying is correct, but I think this is based on a fallacious argument related to statistics, because this is effectively the same argument people have against something like vaccines, which is that, hey, we shouldn't vaccinate, which is worrying about the common case, which is way more likely, because there's an extremely rare case where things do happen, where there is some sort of side effect. And so if we look at this, I don't think there's any strong disagreement that this is many, many, many tens of thousands to millions of times less common than what we're protecting against today. And even if you imagine a scenario where you're able to 99% of the time correctly detect that something is a vulnerability versus not, that other 1% is going to make that 100, 1,000, 10,000 times more vulnerabilities out there that people are going to be able to exploit due to employing the scheme. So I think that I would once again strongly advocate that we don't take the common good case that we seem to be doing relatively well with and make that bad, which is much more prevalent, in order to try to help in a niche case when there are other means and techniques we could be using to try to protect here.
Go ahead. I was going to, whoops.
I hear you, by the way, Evan.
I think we may have lost him, however.
Okay, while he's going, I meant to put this in the beginning because, like, Will has a nice, well-articulated blog post, and I have a very short rebuttal here, which is just an XKCD comic, which I'm not saying is exactly topical, but I think also kind of makes the same point that if we delay, then a lot of the problems and a lot of the issues and stuff we see are all going to be delayed. The attackers are going to be ahead of time. We're not going to make progress on knowing whether there's security issues with things. We're going to get out of sync.
I'm sorry, I had a browser auto update banner show up.
Oh, that's awesome.
Success.
So now you're more secure.
I'm out of that one.
Very topical.
I went to update now, and I was like, no, I didn't mean to click that. I was going to ask first if William had any specific guidance on how people who are using update cooldowns should handle the, oh, hey, here's an urgent security vulnerability. If there were tools or advice that would make it easier. You had referenced Dependabot, which I know a lot of people use, but are there settings or tools to sort of let you set and forget that policy around security updates?
Yeah. So, well, first I'll say I use Dependabot in anger. I think like a lot of other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's two answers to this. One is that there are these tools out there which are like cross ecosystem dependency managers, and those chiefly are Dependabot and Renovate. And so both of those, Dependabot I'm certain of, and Renovate I'm less familiar with, but to my understanding, both have vulnerability feedback within the dependency updating logic. And so both can pull either from GitHub advisories or from OSV or other vulnerability sources, and essentially you can define a policy, and I believe this policy is even the default for cooldowns in both, where you say, like, if a vulnerability appears on this package, bypass my cooldown, send me the PR immediately. And in Dependabot's case, I believe the way they do that is there's a separate UI, and that separate UI has like Dependabot security updates, and so it completely bypasses everything. In Renovate's case, I believe everything is like a big JSON configuration file. And so you can say, like, specifically, if it's a low severity vulnerability, keep the cooldown but lower it to 2 days. If it's a high severity vulnerability, bypass it. I'm sure someone can correct me on this, but I believe there's a larger degree of control in their case. However, I would say this is in a sense not ideal, because Dependabot and Renovate are sort of layers on top of the existing package infrastructure. And the really ideal thing would be for this to be part of like the state management or the state machine for package management within each ecosystem. And so I can't remember if I put this in the post or not, but one of the things that I think is important for ecosystems to evaluate over the next coming years is whether it makes sense to integrate cooldowns natively into the packaging like cycle, the same way that I believe PNPM currently does, for one example. I also wanted to say one thing though, which is that I think the core of the flawed argument with like vaccine stuff is that people think that the individual harm of a vaccine, people who are like vaccine deniers, they think that the individual harm is disproportionate to the value granted to society. Whereas I think in this case, the argument is not that there's like disproportionate harm or not. It's that, in fact, the harm from these very small instances is in fact extremely large. Like it's not that there's like I'm not worried that I'm gonna go blind or something like that. It's more that I think that if you look at the actual impact of the average or like the median CDE versus the impact of Shai-Hulud, for example, even though Shai-Hulud only happens once or twice a year, the impact of that is, to continue with the analogy, pandemic scale, whereas the impact of a CDE is like common cold on median.
And going back to Justin, you had said that there were other better tools for handling this than dependency cooldowns. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
I would. Can I respond to two things Will just said first, and then I'm
Sure.
happy to do that. So first of all, a lot like we see so many fewer of the traditional compromises and so many of the impactful compromises are things that are the traditional type that I think saying like, oh, this thing that's extraordinarily rare had a bunch of people be worried about this and had potential for impact. Also, I think it got hyped a lot because it being a new thing more so than the actual like harm caused by Equifax's breach or caused by like a lot of these other attacks. Um, I would also say that this whole idea that we can just look for things like CVE, high severity CVEs. Um, so that process of creating a high severity CVE isn't heavily regulated, of course, because they can't really check everything to know. So what stops the Shai-Hulud authors from just making high severity CVEs to get everything pushed out right away? I think that's a big unknown question. And I think that all just boils back down to this idea that like we can't tell what is actually a vulnerability. And until you can solve that problem, which is like an undecidable problem in the theoretical computer science sense, you fundamentally can't do what Will is saying without having a high error rate in practice. And a high error rate, I think, if you could do this with zero error, then I think you could make an argument for it. With my extreme position, I think I could buy that more. But this is just not a solvable problem. Like, fundamentally, like independent of what we might feel in our gut, it just isn't. That part isn't solvable. Okay, and then getting to tooling, which is the Evans question that he wanted to ask me about. Sorry, I know I've once again queued up a bunch of stuff Will probably wants to respond to. Do you want to let him respond to that first and then I answer your question, or do you want me to?
No, I'd like to get to what the alternative tooling options are.
Okay, so if we look today, tooling is getting more faster and faster at applying updates and doing this in a good automated way. We saw through DARPA's AICC challenge, which Trail of Bits came in second place with Project Buttercup. Since Will's out of there from before. There's just been tremendous advances. So I think we're reaching the point where in the next coming years, and in fact, Shai-Hulud is like a symptom of this, we are going to be fighting not against humans trying to exploit vulnerabilities, but AI trying to do this at AI speed. And I think that means we need to be applying updates at AI speed, which is one of the reasons why DARPA funded this. And why others in the security space are starting to look at this is like, how can we move fast enough to stop an AI from breaching vulnerabilities in systems? And so any attempt to just like, let's take days and slow things down, I think you make yourself one of the slower antelopes in the herd, and we know what happens to those.
So Eddie had a question about whether any of these have an impact on developer update fatigue. And, I definitely get, 10 or 12 Dependabot PRs most weeks for the, software that I maintain. So I definitely feel a little bit of that.
I'll just quickly say that Eddie's trying to pivot the discussion from pinning dependencies via lock files to floating dependencies, and I don't mind that discussion. We may have even had that discussion at some point. But did we have a debate topic on this? I don't recall.
I don't.
But that's
least,
like a whole nother debate topic. Is what makes sense there?
Well, I mean, I think batching is another potential option there, but
yeah, I think there's some interesting things to be said about batching. I mean, I think one thing that we should, I don't know if it's worth discussing now, but one thing that's worth calling out is that in practice, we should talk about what people actually do. And one thing that people actually do in practice is do batched updates. And so we have to decide whether or not, like, should we be encouraging that? Should we be discouraging that? And if the answer is that Dependabot and other tools incentivize that behavior because otherwise you get 50 or 60 PRs a day, yeah, then the fatigue question does enter into it, I think. And so, you know, there's this whole thing of like, well, if you're getting batches anyways, what is the difference between batching once a day versus once every 3 days? Are you doing a sort of de facto cooldown instead of a de jure cooldown? You know, things like that.
I think there's also over time more and more movement towards floating dependencies and then capturing what they are. Like, I think if you sort of do more of like a post facto lock file to say this is what actually happened through an attestation or something like that, but you're having your dependencies float, then this is also the counter to it, where you don't actually need to know. You don't need to bother with the dependency, with the your CI/CD process will clue you in if anything is broken, and you mostly will just run those tests yourself and then hit the little green button. So why not let you do this at like script speed, and then you can avoid a lot of this wormable potential and things and get things out faster.
So I think this may be leaning a little bit to a topic that William wanted, but I was wondering if you look at the worms like Shai-Hulud, they use dangerous functionality like pre-install and post-install hooks that allow you to run custom code as soon as the package is installed. Would it make sense to use cooldowns only when like that functionality appears and not in general?
I think the answer to that is that it depends. I mean, it depends. I think in terms of like doing the most good first, I think that what we have seen so far is that the most common exploitation pattern, which is I am positive going to change over time, is that attackers are currently favoring npm install scripts. They're favoring setup.py. They're favoring to a much, much smaller degree, but they will over time favor more build.rs and so on and so forth. Basically, build time code execution versus installation code execution.
Okay.
Because so answer A, like the 20% answer is yes, I think it would be good probably to prioritize cooldowns for those things. Answer B is that I am positive that as that diminishes in effectiveness over time, attackers will do more of what we're seeing with XZ, which is if you are a nation state, you are going to spend months or years setting up your attack and then trying to sneak it in as subtly as possible, which these people are not typically nation states. They're opportunistic attackers. They're looking for a really, really quick win to worm onto the next target. Whereas with XZ, what we saw was like, we were going to embed the backdoor in a test binary artifact, which nobody will look at, and we'll hide it in some auto tools cruft that nobody looks at either. And so I think we'll see that probably over time as sort of attackers become more advanced, is my speculation. But this is a place where there's no strong data yet, or supporting data rather.
Justin, I saw you put a comment in the chat about Dependabot behavior.
Yep.
I don't know if you
want
to...
sorry. So we started to try to work to help Dependabot to address like the comment John had, which is like, hey, my code doesn't have good enough unit tests, basically to feel comfortable doing that. And we actually started for the last, I don't know, 6 to 9 months, we did some exploration to find, could we identify like a bunch of software projects that would be good kind of canaries in the coal mine for a new version of something that isn't pinned to be tested on those unit tests so that then you could trust that it would be fine on your system. And then with the thinking that GitHub and others would do this at kind of a centralized level and then push things out in a smarter way with that. And what we found is that actually they're doing something kind of like that already.
I was going to say they have a compatibility score.
They have something they're doing that is actually doing a pretty good job. So this is why you're not getting flooded with like Dependabot requests to break things, because like Dependabot's actually pretty darn smart. And so and there's probably room for improvement there. Like once again, going back to my extremist corner, I will say that I believe that problem is a much more solvable problem. Like finding good sets of things to run tests on before we push them out to you is a very solvable problem. I think that knowing whether something is a vulnerability or not is not a solvable problem. And so we should like actually look for the place where we can put the lever to move the world. And I agree with what I believe to be part of Will's point, which is that this is really caused by the fact that a lot of the packaging ecosystems allow you to do all kinds of crazy things at setup time and stuff like this. Attackers look for things that are easy to exploit and are interesting in that regard, and they move to the path of least resistance. And this is why I think even though after XZ, there was like this massive examination across the open source ecosystem to find all the XZs that we missed. And as far as I know, we didn't really miss any other ones. We got lucky to find this one, but at least if they were clever, they were clever enough that we couldn't find them. So I would say that most attackers are going to go for the least cost thing, and if it becomes way too prohibitive, what we've seen from things like smartphone security and browser security and stuff like that is you make it hard enough for attackers, then these issues become less and less and less prevalent and less impactful. So we all need to do all the great things that we should be doing around trusted publishing, around proper security throughout our software supply chain and stuff like this. And if we do those types of things in a good way, I think that we can make it cost prohibitive, so we have so many fewer of these types of incidents to worry about.
We're about at 10:35. I was going to give each of you a chance to wrap up your statements, and then I think this has been useful and enlightening for many of us. So thank you both. William, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I was going to say, as part of my wrap up, I wanted to call back one of the things that Justin brought up before, which is there's this hard problem that there is no general solution for, which is how do you know whether a given piece of code is vulnerable or malicious or not? That's not something that I think in our lifetimes we're ever going to see a general solution for. But the problem, I think, the problem with this framing is that it works both ways. I mean, there's just as much reason to believe, absent of numbers, that a given update is also malicious or contains a novel vulnerability, for example. Now, we have numbers to then apply and say, so and so number of new updates, in fact, don't contain vulnerability statistically. And so we can make a statistical argument. But absent those numbers, which is, I think my closing argument is basically going to be that we need more data for these things. But absent those numbers, it's my opinion that there's no reason in particular to believe that as the velocity of code increases, like we're seeing with agents, that we're not going to see new and exciting ways to make projects vulnerable, and also new and exciting ways to sneak malicious code into projects over time. I think that basically, the rising tide lifts all boats, and so that includes new vulnerabilities in code. It includes also fixes. It's going to make things both, safer and less safe at an increasing velocity. Is essentially my belief there. So I guess overall, my view is that, are cooldowns the century-long mitigation? Probably not, but I think that they are a good sort of like empirically demonstrable mitigation for the attacks that we've seen over the last 18 months.
All right, and to close, I'll say I think a lot of what Will just said makes my point, other than the closing part, which is if if we are seeing more Shai-Haluds than we are seeing Log4js and other compromises, then I agree that cooldowns would make more sense. But we're not, in that world today, and we have a solution for old software, which is basically like, don't have every patch vulnerability be a 0-day. Apply software updates, which is the reason why I think we're not in the terrible situation we were in 10, 15 years ago, where effectively we had all these antivirus and security vendors that ran all kinds of weird code in your kernel to try to deal with the fact that you hadn't updated your software, often because there weren't updates being generated quickly enough. So I think that with those lessons learned, I agree that if like the physics of reality shifts to the point where most updates are now these malicious things, then what Will's saying makes sense. But until then, I think we shouldn't throw out our good defenses against the thing that historically has been more common, and in order to address a niche case that almost never comes up. So that's my final plea. Apply your software updates, even if they stop you from being the moderator for 5 seconds in the middle of a debate. It makes you safer.
I think there's an extra interesting point there that neither of you brought up around not just applying the software updates to your code base, but actually rolling them out, which is potentially an entirely different schedule. Depending on how you roll out your software, it may or may not be a daily or weekly process. But I think this has been, as I said before, super helpful and enlightening. And thank everyone who attended and folks who asked interesting questions. And feel free to share this around. And we will have more of these debates in the future. If you have a topic that you're interested in, feel free to bring it up. And thank you both, William and Justin.
Yeah,
Thank you, William. That's great. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it was great.
And now back to you, John, as facilitator for the meeting.
Yes, thank you. That was a fun conversation. To Evan's last point, we could have a future debate. There would be a terrible idea about how much you should pay open source developers to increase the release frequency, as opposed to just selling them only to enterprise customers. But that's a different working group, a different tag than this one, I think.
I'm not sure we have a tag for
that. Project updates. Does anyone have any updates around the different areas here?
I'll just quickly say, I think that Kyverno, I've heard from Andy Martin. He seems to be listening to these, looking in the meeting notes or listening to the meeting recordings later or something like that. And I think some progress is being made. I'm anxiously waiting for it to be turned over to the reviewers as ready for us to do things with. But the security assessment for Kyverno is hopefully moving along.
Awesome. Security control. Oh, go ahead, Evan.
The Supply Chain Insights project is probably going to be switching to a biweekly cadence starting in the new year, and moving towards having something wrapped up. Not everything that was originally envisioned, but hopefully some useful examples and some calls to action for projects to make it more discoverable when they've been publishing SBOMs, because we've spent a lot of time looking for them.
That sounds like a good strategic short-term deliverable, which would be helpful. How about security controls? I think there was the first meeting last week.
Yep, we had our first meeting last Friday, and that resulted in an agreed upon path forward, which I documented in that README PR. And thank you, Brent and John, for your reviews. And then, just so you know, if you didn't see it, at Evan or Eddie, if you wanted to take a look, I added you as reviewers just to make sure that we all agree that it accurately represents the outcomes that we discussed. But yeah, already starting to work on that first activity, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of that to show this Friday. Oh, and the meetings are set for weekly, but the last two in December were canceled, and we'll pick back up in January.
Awesome. Uh, the MCP, was anybody here able to make the meeting on Monday? I was hoping to make it, and I have not yet seen the recording. There was a meeting on the calendar. It's on the tag security and compliance calendar for Monday. It's 8 a.m. Central Time, so 9 Eastern, be very early, 7 a.m. Pacific Time. So take a look at that. The recording should be available. I think it's still iterating on the scope and things of that nature. So yeah, I will check that out. And if any folks are interested, there is a private Slack channel as well too that you can be added to. Any other project groups? We still have Security Slam listed on here. Eddie?
Yeah. Well, um, we started we kind of decided we're gonna do that, but then Marina has taken a extended leave of absence, so I'm not sure what planning has happened with CNCF staff as far as
Yeah, I think we got an initial response back.
Marina's here.
Hi.
She's been back. You're behind the times, Eddie.
I'm the one who's on a mental leave of absence, apparently.
All good, Eddie. I think it's this time of year is tricky to get this kind of stuff done. But yeah, so I think we got an initial response from Lindsay, but I think it has fallen off her radar. So hopefully we can get that sorted in the new year. Either for one of the coupons. One of the five of them. I think we can get it happening.
Yeah, I think Amsterdam is the next one, and then the ones in the Asia region are over the summer mostly. So, um, cool. Well, let us know on the Security Slam front if and when other folks um, can help out, because I think that would be fun. All right. Triage of current issues. I am not sure that we have any new issues. The link here takes us to all of the existing initiatives, many of which we discussed just now. The identity and access management paper is one that is still out there. I think the last update was the search for reviewers and some potential more tweaking of the formatting of that. The other one I see on here is the compliance use cases white paper, which I don't know.
Yeah, we had a little discussion about that, and it seems to have shown up with almost a complete document, which is not normally how we do these things. So we need to see to what extent this can get moved into our standard flow.
Yes, that would be. I'm also curious, are issues still being migrated from one place to the other, or have these existed previously and just not had the right tags or labels applied to them? I think I remember this one in the tag security repo, but then I lost track of it. Jen?
So this one came out of the original compliance WG under tag security, and it has been open since the beginning of the reboot, and it just recently got classified under tag security. So that's how it ended up in our queue. So I think maybe even just step one is just checking back in with the submitter just to make sure that they're still interested in pursuing the initiative, because I don't think there's been any activity for a while. Which
Okay,
I'm happy to comment on there.
that would be perfect. Thank you. I'm not sure. Let me take a quick peek at the tag security repo just in case there's any new issues there. And it doesn't look like that. Quite a few inactive things there. Did we have I know there was recent conversation around archiving the tag security repo. Is there a date or uh, a plan for that process? I see Brant shaking his head somewhat.
That is probably something that we need to define. I think it's loosely held as the end of the year when with talking with Rion. So we might need to follow up there and express any concerns that we might have, or I guess get ready to handle any redirections that we need to provide.
Evan?
Um, I noticed that there's an issue on updating the supply chain compromise catalog, and I don't know what process we have for making sure that either gets updated or for saying, this was a great effort, but we're not going to keep maintaining it. But we probably need to think about whether that is a small sub project or something that we have a different process for maintaining, or whether we're done maintaining it.
I'm trying to remember if we had a sub project submitted for this, or if we were just waiting for the charter to be approved so that we could officially create our own sub project without the TOC. But yeah, it's something we should follow up on. I think we get pretty consistent contributions over the course of a year to the catalog. Um, it ebbs and flows. So I do think it's worth maintaining. And I know that I think Santiago's name is still on there, but he's probably not the right person going forward to um, be responsible for that. All right. Let's see here. Looking on the calendar towards the next couple of weeks, we've got Christmas Eve and then New Year's Eve. So both of those meetings have already been canceled, which means our first meeting in the new year will be January 7th. Um, and do we have a community demo? I thought I saw something. If we
I volunteered to do a demo on Minder if people are interested, which is OpenSSF supply chain security software, but uses a bunch of CNCF projects as scaffolding and runs on Kubernetes. So
Yeah, that would be awesome. Um, cool. The The calendar after that is wide open if other folks are interested in signing up for future community demos. Super informal, willing to hear about most anything security related that's not a vendor pitch. So, yeah. Other than that, does anybody have anything else for today they wanted to chat about? All right. In that case, we will send everyone back with an extra 8 minutes to get up from their desks, walk away.
Our next
Justin?
meeting is going to be in January, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. See everybody then. Have a good holiday.
Right, thank you.
Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Bye.
Happy holidays. Thank you.